Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late.
Boker Tov.
Tov.
Boker Tov, good morning.
Reading Daf today. Hanan's joined. We can all get started. So it's a short Daf, so everyone will get a few extra minutes for davening today. That's it. But we are about to finish, not tomorrow, God willing, Masechet Ta'anit, and then begin, I think, Megillah. That's what we begin next, which I guess is good time because Purim will be coming up eventually. But to summarize real quickly, today's daf is daf Lamed 30 on Masechet Ta'anit. We got up to the end of 29b at 8 lines from the bottom. And the machloket we had yesterday, which is a very practical halacha today, is the machloket between Rav and Shmuel, which about whether or not the laws of limiting washing, right, to laundry, which we said meant wearing fresh clothing and taking a haircut, whether those laws apply just in the week before Tisha B'Av. So if Tisha B'Av is on Wednesday, just for 3 days before, and Tisha B'Av, of course, or whether they also apply the week after Tisha B'Av, meaning the whole week of Tisha B'Av, even after the fast day, not that they end at the fast day. Rav said, which is how we generally practice, that it ends at the fast day. Shmuel said it continues beyond the fast day, and we just saw a Braita which said exactly what Rav said. So ask the Gemara, Tiyufta de Shmuel. That seems to be a question on Shmuel. Now that's where we're picking up. Amar lecha Shmuel, Shmuel will tell you Tanahi. And in fact, it's a machloket Tanaim, that although clearly the Braita goes against me, I'm not the only opinion, and there's a machloket Tanaim, and there's an opinion that agrees with me about how to observe the extra time around the fast day, Tanya. Now we pick up with this Braita, again, 8 lines from the bottom. Tisha B'Av shechal liot b'Shabbat. Let's say Tisha B'Av falls out, which is not infrequent, on Shabbat itself or on Sunday. Or Chen Erev Tisha B'Av shechal liot b'Shabbat, where the 8th day of Av, or the day we celebrate, as that falls out on Shabbat. So meaning Tisha B'Av is going to start immediately after Shabbat, right? So how do you practice that Shabbat, which is either Tisha B'Av, which is not where you observe Tisha B'Av, you're going to push it off to the next day, but it is Tisha B'Av, or it's the day before Tisha B'Av, but it's Shabbat. So what do? Says the Braita, Ochel v'shoter kol tzarko. You can eat whatever you want to eat. You don't observe any extra restrictions on eating because it's Erev Tisha B'Av or even Tisha B'Av itself. You can put on your table even a meal like Shlomo's meals in his time, even the famous meals of King Solomon. No limitations whatsoever, because it's Shabbos. However, continues the Braita, Asur l'saper l'chabes, but you're not, of course, before that day, before Shabbos, you can't get a haircut or do laundry. Mirosh chodesh ad tanit divrei Rabbi Meir. This is an opinion that's very familiar to us, right? Because what most of us do in Ashkenaz is that you're not allowed to do it from Rosh Chodesh until the Tanit. So from Rosh Chodesh Av until the Tanit, what we call the 9 days, right? You're not allowed to get haircuts or to wash your clothing or wear fresh clothing. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Kol HaChodesh kulo asur. Not just those 9 days. The entire month of Av is prohibited. Av is a month where the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and we saw all these other terrible things that happened, with basically an entire month of mourning. So you can't get a haircut, you can't wear fresh clothing the entire month of Av. Okay, we obviously don't practice this, but it would make a difficult summer, I think. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Eino Oser Asur Ela Oto Shabbat Bavad. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, no, what you prohibit is that week itself, and this is what Shmuel's opinion was. It's not the month, it's not the from Rosh Chodesh, it's just the week of Tisha B'Av. So no matter what day of the week Tisha B'Av falls on, the days before and the days after are prohibited from joining, because that's the morning. The morning is the week around Tisha B'Av. The Tanya, there's another Braita which says the exact similar language. It says, "Noheg Evel mirush chodesh ala tanit." Noheg Evel. Now this sort of is escalating this by a level, because what we'll see later today what Noheg Evel means. But this is essentially you act as a mourner in some ways from Rosh Chodesh until the Tanit. Again, we'll see what acting like a mourner means, but you're annoyed with Avelut from Rosh Chodesh until the Tanit, Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol HaChodesh kulo asur. You should do things that are like washing, like getting a haircut and washing clothing are usher the whole month. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, "Eino oser elo oto Shabbat bilvad." You're only prohibited that week itself, which again is what Shmuel said. It's very interesting, which we're going to discuss in a second, that Rav's opinion is not quoted here at all from any of these Tanaim, right? Because Rav's opinion was that you are prohibited from the week of Tisha B'Av until Tisha B'Av, but not beyond, right? And none of these three opinions seem to say that. One is the entire week of Tisha B'Av, meaning before and after. One is from Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av. One is from the whole month. So Rav seems to have an opinion that's more makil than all of those, and we'll see where it comes from in a second. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Shalshta Mikra Echad Darshu. In fact, all three Tanaim were analyzing the same pasuk to understand, how to extend the mourning and the marking, the designation of Tisha B'Av. Because it says in Hosea, Hishbati kol misosa, I will cause you to cease all joy, right? Misosa is joy. Hishbati from Shabbat. Chaga chodasha b'Shabbata. Your holidays, your months, and your Shabbats, and your weeks. So Mandam Rosh Chodesh, if you say that you stop enjoying haircuts and washing from Rosh Chodesh, that's out of Tanit, that's Michaga. Because it says Chag, Chag is referring to the Chag of Rosh Chodesh. So basically from Rosh Chodesh, when you would generally celebrate, you stop, and that's when you start mourning. Umanda Amar Kol Chodesh Kula, we're on the top now of Daf Lamed. The one who says the whole month, or Yehuda's opinion that the entire month of Av, that's because it says Michudasha. It says, I will stop your months, your celebration of your whole month. Umanda Amar Kol Shabbat Kula, the Rabbi Gamliel says, who says the entire week around Tisha B'Av, that's from the word Shabbata. It says your weeks, basically. So therefore, each one sort of emphasizes, of course, the pasuk says all three words, so you can say all three, right? But each one takes one of those as their model for how to extend and how to commemorate the morning of Tisha B'Av. Amar Rava, halacha Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Says Rava, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who said that we mourn and we don't get haircuts the entire week around Tisha B'Av, before and after. The Amar Rava, but Rava also was quoted as saying, halacha Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said from Rosh Chodesh until Tisha B'Av. Says more, but Tervayo Lekula. He holds of both opinions, but Lekula. Meaning he takes the overlap from those two opinions. Meaning, if he said halacha Rabbi Meir, I would have thought Hagamina, the whole thing Rabbi Meir said. Afil Rosh Chodesh until Tisha B'Av. Kamash Malan, that's only the week. Halacha Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. That's the week of Tisha B'Av. I would have thought that even after the fast, the rest of the week, you also have to avoid all these actions. Kamash Malan, halachak Rabbi Meir. And so that is how Rava Paskin, which is what Rav had quoted earlier, which is basically that we take the kula of both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and you only have to observe these extra stringencies of not getting a haircut and not washing clothing, wearing fresh clothing during the week of Tisha B'Av, which is what we refer to as Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av, the week that it falls out. Now, you're probably familiar, again, I quote this a lot, that some Ashkenazim, I should say, are generally, the Ramah quotes, I think, I don't know the exact words, that we paskin that you do it from Rosh Chodesh. So like Rabbi Meir himself said, not like Rava just said. The Sfardim are follow the Gemara more closely, and they don't observe the 9 days the way we do. Like they observe Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av. The Rishonim and certainly the Achronim point out that there are many, many customs that have come that have been added on, that have changed sort of the Gemara's opinion. Right? The Gemara very clearly doesn't apply this as extensively as we do, but over time, there have been customs, minhagim, to add on either from Rosh Chodesh. Of course, as we know, we don't get married from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz already. Right? There's we don't get haircuts, many, that's also an issue from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. So the actual practical application has evolved over the generations. Drinking wine is going to come up. We'll discuss that, which we obviously haven't discussed yet, or not, regarding what we do. Continues the Gemara now to that next topic of what we do on Erev Tisha B'Av. So we're first two dots on Lamed and Aleph. The Mishnah said, this is our Mishnah back a few days ago, Erev Tisha B'Av. On the day, remember, on Tisha B'Av, of course, you can't eat. But on the Erev Tisha B'Av, on the day before, the Mishnah said, Lo yochal adam shnei tafshilin. You shouldn't eat two, major cooked meal dishes. Meaning you're supposed to simplify your meal. Instead of having, an appetizer and an entree, right? You shouldn't have two things. You should have only one thing. And then the Mishnah continued, lo yochal basar, lo yishteh yayin. You're not supposed to eat meat. You're not supposed to drink wine during this Erev Tisha B'Av. Says the Gemara, when is that? All of the day or some of the day? Says Rav Yehuda, lo shanu ela mishesha otu l'mala. It's only in the afternoon, meaning not all day of Erev Tisha B'Av, only 6 hours of the day and onward. You wake up in the morning and have a big breakfast or brunch, that's no problem. Drink all the wine you want, right? Again, we don't do this. We stopped drinking wine long before, but in the Gemara's time, they did. And avu mishesha otu l'mata mutar, but 6 hours and before, which probably means chatzot, right? 6 hours, then you're allowed to eat whatever you want to eat. Including, according to this, meat and wine and two dishes, anything like that. Rav Yehuda, furthermore, Rav Yehuda said, Lo shano b'suda mafsikba. This whole prohibition of not drinking wine and not eating two dishes, and not eating meat is only the meal that you are separating, that your last meal before the fast. So the suda hamafseket, as we call it, right? The suda you eat right before you pause for the fast. Aval suda she'ina mafsik mutar. If you're not used suda hamafseket, meaning if you eat a big meal at 3 p.m. and then you're gonna have another suda hamafseket at 5 o'clock, just say, you can eat whatever you want in the earlier meal because that's not the meal of the fast. And says the halacha tervayo lekula. Both of these things are used lekula, meaning now we to speak it through. If you just told me that it applies only suda mafsikba, I would have thought right? Let's say you're traveling on Erev Tisha B'Av and you eat your big meal in the morning because you're going to be on the train all day, right? Or whatever. So then you might think that it applies to that meal because even though it's at 11 o'clock in the morning, it's your suda mafseket. Kamash malan, that's not the case. It's only mishesha otu l'mala. It's only if it's an afternoon meal. If you'd only told me that halacha, that of Rabbi Yehuda, of 6 hours in the day and later, I would think any time in the afternoon has limitations on what you can eat, even if it's not the suda mafseket. Kamash malan, that's only the suda mafsikba. And so, according to this psak, which is our psak, which is not the way we practice, but this is our psak, the only meal that you really have to limit what you eat and what you drink is the last meal in the afternoon of Erev Tisha B'Av. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us because we, as you probably know, many people don't eat meat for the whole 9 days, or Shavuot Shechalbo, don't drink wine that whole week, right? So these are clearly things that were added on later as these the morning customs sort of grossly expanded, and in different communities in different ways. So there are fundamental differences in Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities. There are even within communities, different practices. But this is the Gemara's psak. And of course, this is addressed in all the Rishonim and all the practices, Tosfos, and etc. Continues the Gemara, Tanya Kalishna Kama, Tanya Kalishna Batra. We have a Braita which supports both the first way it was said, which is that it's the morning and afternoon which matters, and a Braita which supports the second way, which is that it's the last meal that matters. Says the Gemara, not clear to me why we focus first on the second one. But Tanya Kalishna Batra, first there's a Braita to support the second language. It says, and now a quote from the Braita, Hasoed Erev Tisha B'Av, a person who's eating on the 8th day of Av, on Erev Tisha B'Av, Im atid lisod suda acheret, if they plan to have another meal later in the day, then mutar lechol basar v'lishtot yayin. If they want, they can eat meat, drink wine, have a regular meal. Im lav, but if this is their last meal of Erev Tisha B'Av, it's called the suda mafseket, then asur lechol basar v'lishtot yayin. So that's the Braita very clearly speaks that out. And Tanya Kalishna Kama, there's a Braita which also supports the first language, which is that it depends on whether it's the first half of the day or the second half of the day, morning or afternoon. Because this Braita says now, quote, Erev Tisha B'Av, lo yochal adam shnei tavshilim, which is what our Mishnah said. On the day of Erev Tisha B'Av, you should not eat two distinct dishes, meaning you should keep it simple. And lo yochal basar, lo yishteh yain, you shouldn't eat meat or wine. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel omer, yishaneh. This is our Mishnah. Shimon ben Gamliel said you should just change your practice. You don't actually have to stop even the last meal, according to Shimon ben Gamliel. You don't have to not drink wine or eat meat. You just have to be less typical, use less food and less prominence than you normally would. What does that mean? I'm Rav Yehuda, Ketzad Mishaneh. Says Rav Yehuda, how do you change? If normally you would have two main courses, have one main course. If you only sat down to eat with 10 people, right? So sit down with 5 people. Be more modest, but it doesn't mean you have to be alone, sitting in the corner, doing it by yourself. This is like this part. Right? If normally you have 10 beers during your meal, so cut down to 5. Right? You gotta just whatever it is. I don't know what they were drinking exactly, but whatever it is, cut it down. So the point is that it's not that you have to stop completely. You just have to moderate in order to show that something unfortunate is being commemorated. The Medvar Memorim says the Braita now, that's only in the afternoon, 6 hours of the day and on. If it was earlier than 6 hours, it would be mutar. And as we quoted earlier, in fact, the way we paskin, again, not the way we practice, but the way we paskin is that both of these are true. And so that the only limitations are in the last meal that's done in the afternoon or above 6 hours. But in the morning, in theory, and if it's not the last meal, even in the afternoon, you can eat whatever you want, which again, halachically would mean even wine and meat. But since we're not eating wine and meat for many days, of course, are not going to do that. But I would say most people do practice no other limitations on the meals that they have on Erev Tisha B'Av, meaning you eat a regular meal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a full meal with regular people, without limitations. And then there's a separate Suda Mafseket, which of course does have limitations. Tanya Idach, another Braita taught us, Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal adam shtei tavshilim. Again, on Erev Tisha B'Av, whenever the time is, as we said, probably the afternoon and the last meal, a person should not eat 2 separate dishes. Lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yayin, Divrei Rabbi Meir, and the Chachamim say, as they did in our Mishnah, yishaneh. All the person really needs to do is change their regular habit. Umima'et bebasar b'yayin. Just minimize, don't have to cut out, but have less meat and wine. Ketzad mima'et, how do you do that? Litra basar. They usually eat a pound of meat. Yochal chatzi litra, so go light. Eat a slider instead of a burger. If normally you drink a whole liter of wine, you could drink half of that. But eino ragil kol ikar. Now, if you don't usually drink, then asur, right? This is not the meal to start drinking a little bit, but it all depends on what you normally do at a regular meal. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamil Omer, and this doesn't just mean the meal, right? If, let's say you had some kind of light things, they used to have, they didn't, I guess, have a lot of cakes back then, but they would eat snon, which is a vegetable, or maliach, which is usually means herring, salted fish. Sometimes it means salted meats, so it's not so clear. But either way, it was something that wasn't a main meal, but something that was nibbled on, or eaten to sort of sum up the meal, or what we would call dessert, I guess. That would be fine. You can, according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, there's no limitation on even dessert. Tanya Idach, and there's another Braita which said, Kol shehu mishum tisha b'av asur lechol basar v'asur l'shtod yayin v'asur l'chutz. Any sudah mafseket, any final meal that is done for Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to drink wine, eat meat, or even wash at that time. But that's only because it's Tisha B'Av. But if it's Eino Mishum Tisha B'Av, meaning if it's a different fast day, but it's like a public fast day, let's say, like we've discussed our whole Masechet, right? Then, or as Rashi says, or it's not the last meal before Tisha B'Av, it's earlier in the day, then mutar lechol basar v'lishtot yayin, but still it's asur l'chutz. It might still be asur to wash as you get to the afternoon of Tisha B'Av. Says Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yossi Mishum Aviv, his father Rabbi Yossi. No, that's not true. Kol shash mutar lechol basar mutar l'chutz. There's no time, that you can't wash, but you're allowed to eat meat. As long as you're allowed to eat meat, you'd be allowed to wash as well on Erev Tisha B'Av. Which is that's how we definitely, actually, they take out the word basar, take it away. Kol shesh mutar lechol, anytime you're allowed to eat, you're mutar l'chutz. I take it back, basar is misleading there. Meaning that the prohibition of washing, which is one of the prohibitions, the inuyim of Tisha B'Av, does not apply on Erev Tisha B'Av, right? You're allowed to wash, maybe we don't shower, that's some practice, but certainly allowed to wash your hands and do things that you're not allowed to do on Tisha B'Av up to the fast. As long as you're allowed to eat, the fast didn't start yet, or the practices didn't start yet. Tanura Banan, I'm just transitioning to that next question. So first word on the line, the third wide line. Kol mitzvot hanohagot be'eva nohaget tisha b'av. Right? All of the practices, the mitzvot that apply to a person who's in mourning, a direct mourner, apply on Tisha B'Av, because the practice on Tisha B'Av essentially is a practice of mourning for the Beit HaMikdash. And so everybody on Tisha B'Av is like a mourner. What are some of those practices? And this is not the Masechet about mourning, but what are some of those practices? Asur b'achila v'shtiyah, which of course does not apply to a mourner, right? But we're including everything that you practice on Tisha B'Av. So you're not allowed to eat and drink. You're not allowed to do sicha. You're not allowed to anoint yourself, with oil and use creams. Ubenilata sandal, and you can't wear regular leather shoes, which are viewed as being a luxury and a comfort. Ubetashmisha mita, and intercourse is prohibited on Tisha B'Av. And continues the Braita, v'asur likrot b'torah b'neviim u'b'ktuvim. You're not allowed to read the Tanakh, the Torah, Neviim, and Ketuvim. We'll see, because that gives you joy. Ulishanot b'mishnah, you're not allowed to learn Mishnah, u'b'talmud, u'b'midrash, halachot v'agadot, all of these things. You can't study the Mishnah, the Gemara, Daf Yomi, the halachot, agadot, all of it is prohibited. Aval korehu b'makom she'eino ragil likrot. But you can read a portion of the Torah or the Nevi'im that you're not really familiar with, because it's not joy, you struggle through it. It's like reading a foreign thing. When you're not comfortable with the language, you're not comfortable with the topic, you're not going to enjoy necessarily reading it. You're going to be working to try to understand it. You can learn something, and learn a Gemara that's very difficult, that you're not familiar with. Again, because if you're not familiar with it, according to this opinion, we don't pass it this way, but if according to this opinion, you don't get joy out of doing it, because you're struggling to understand it. You're struggling to get the meaning of it. Continues the Braita, Korei b'kinot, but you are allowed to, of course, read the kinot, including the kinot that are based on psukim, which many of them are, psukim in Yirmiyahu and Eicha. Be'Iyov, you can read Sefer Iyov, because Iyov is a thoroughly depressing book about mourning. Ubedvarim hara'im shebeYirmiyahu, you can read some of the bad things in Yirmiyahu. You can't read all of Yirmiyahu, because there's a lot of uplifting things in Yirmiyahu, and there's some historical things in Yirmiyahu, but you can read sort of all the Jeremiads in Yirmiyahu. And continues the Braita, Tinokot shel Beit Rabban are bitelim. Now there's a huge debate here about what the girsa is here, and the Rif and the Rush both say the words here should be einon bitelim, and then take out the next words, the whole next pasuk. That according to this Braita, they might add the word different Rabbi Meir. That according to Rabbi Meir, according to the Tanna Kama, the kids in school are not bitelim, meaning we've no problem with kids continuing to learn, because kids learning is not the same equivalent to adults learning. They're learning basically by rote. They're not getting any joy out of it. They don't know what it is exactly. They're just learning because you want them to memorize, basically, or learn the techniques. But they're not going to get any of the inherent joy that is expected to be gotten out of learning Torah, and so therefore you don't have to stop them from doing it on Tisha B'Av. Says Rabbi Yehuda Omer continues. I skipped a few words. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I disagree with that halacha of the Tanna Kama, which probably is Rabbi Meir. Af eino koreh b'makom she'eino ragil likrot. You should not even learn that which you're not used to learning. Why? Because even though you're not familiar with it, it's still enjoyable. If you're learning something for the first time, even though it's hard and you have to work to understand the language and the context, you still get tremendous joy, hopefully, out of learning, out of understanding, and of grasping the ideas and learning Torah. But says Rabbi Yehuda, you can at least read Iyov, though. V'korehu be'Iyov, and the Kinot, and Dvarim hara'im shebeYirmiyahu. But says Rabbi Yehuda, Tinokot shel Beit Rabban b'teilim bo. But in fact, you cancel school on Tisha B'Av. The kids don't learn on Tisha B'Av. Shenemar, because, and this goes on the whole thing, the reason that all of this learning is prohibited, even things that you don't understand well, that are new to you, and even the kids who really don't grasp the full meaning of it, nonetheless, the pasuk says, Pikudei Hashem Yisharim Misamchei Lev. The pikudim, the laws of God are straight, they bring you joy. And so there's an inherent joy in learning, even if you don't really understand what you're learning, or or struggling to grasp the topic. And therefore, we prohibit learning both for kids and for those who are learning topics that are brand new to them. So it's very much limited.
They had summer school, huh?
They had vacation, correct? Summer school. Well, I don't think they had summer concept exactly, but I mean, they had summer, but I don't think they had a school concept like Continued the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom now. The next thing was lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yayin, right? We had just a long discussion as to when this was, right? Whether it's the last, not the machloket, the opinion was it's the last meal, but not earlier in the day and not even in the afternoon if it's not your last meal. But during whatever that meal is, you shouldn't drink wine, you shouldn't eat meat. Tana, the Braita says, don't think this means you can't eat any meat. You're allowed to eat, again, we don't do this, but this is referring even to the Sudam Mafseket. You can eat meat that is salted because, as everybody knows, once you salt the meat, you sort of take some of I'm not a big meat eater, so I'm just saying this all not facetiously, but based on what the Gemara tells me. But that, the most enjoyable meat is when you slaughter the animal and eat the meat fresh. And I don't exactly know what about it so enjoyable, but that's the most enjoyable. I guess I know some patients who are hunters who tell me the same thing. But once you process it and you let it sit and you salt it and it stays over time, it loses some of its specialness. Again, I don't think probably in my life I've never had meat that was that fresh. But it says that, and they generally call it basar meliach, right? Because you can't, obviously without a freezer, you can't just leave meat out, right? A week later, you're gonna be in big trouble, right? So they would start salting it. I don't know how soon you salt it, but they start salting it. So once it's basar meliach, it's not real meat. It's not the same enjoyment as fresh meat once it's salted, right? So therefore, says the Braita, you can eat basar meliach, and you can be shoteh yain migito. You can drink wine that comes straight from the press, which was the very fresh wine, which is not nearly as good as aged wine that has had some time.
That's called juice.
Called grape juice, right?
If it hasn't fermented, it comes straight from the press. It's just juice.
Okay, but I guess so. But it still has alcohol in it.
Where does the alcohol come from?
It didn't ferment. You're right. Okay, I'm not sure if that's what it means though, because it might also just mean that it was. Well, maybe it is what it means. Okay, I'm gonna take it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm gonna take it. Because it might mean that it sat in the press. Can it ferment in the press if it sits in the thing? You need a fermenting agent. Yeah. Okay. I don't know that much about wine. I could tell you that. This gets a little tricky. I would just say because as you probably know, Jews all throughout the world are accustomed to drink grape juice and call it wine, right? And so that's not a simple thing, right? I don't know that. I'm not sure if it's something that the rabbis had to find a justification for after the fact, or if it was really because it is. I mean, people drink it for 4 cups for Seder. Times where you really need wine. And so we consider that wine, but why is not so clear. Either way, this Braita says that on the Sudam Mafseket you can eat basar meliach and you can drink fresh what I called wine, or as James called juice. Now how long basar meliach ad kama? How long is salting it? How much time does it take basically to lose the freshness of the meat? Meaning, how long after the animal is slaughtered can you call meat being real, bona fide, awesome meat? Okay, how long would you say? Says the Gemara, time like a shlamim, right? The Torah talks about the basar of the shlamim. Remember, when you shecht an animal in the Beit HaMikdash, the shlamim, you can eat it for 2 days and 1 night. So that's how long it's considered to be the fresh, good meat. They obviously didn't salt that meat. They had to eat it right away. So if it's within 2 days of slaughtering the animal, that's considered to be real good, fresh meat. Once you're beyond that, it's not really that good, as good. And according to this Braita, you can eat it on Erev Tisha B'Av, not on Tisha B'Av, but on Erev Tisha B'Av. Again, we obviously don't do that. Otherwise, we'd be having corned beef sandwiches. No one's doing that. The yain migito ad kama. Now, how long is wine that from the press considered to be fresh wine and not, I guess, fermented? As long as it's got still bubbling. So if it's still bubbling up, I guess that's the fermentation process maybe is going on, or whatever the bubbling is from. That's considered to be fresh wine, and it's not really very good, and it doesn't fall into the real category of wine. Tana and the Braita says yain toses ein bo mishum gilui. You recall there was a huge concern back then, maybe today too, with leaving liquids uncovered because there were snakes or scorpions that would go into the water and drink and leave poison behind. And so you never would drink from something that wasn't covered. And says the Braita though, but if it's wine that's fermented, that's fresh, you don't have to worry about it. Even the snakes, I guess, don't like that kind of wine. So no animal is going to go in and start drinking that. The kama tisisato shlosha yamim. And this writer says that's 3 days. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav kacha yiminhago Rav Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. In fact, the custom, and this is brought la'alacha, the custom of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi was not like anything we've just read until now. What Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi used to do is Erev Tisha B'Av Mivian Lo Pat Chareva B'Melech. He sat his Suda Mafsek on Erev Tisha B'Av. They brought him some Pat Chareva, which means very hard, stale kind of bread, B'Melech with salt, meaning nothing on it. The Yoshev, turn the page, Yoshev Ben Tanur L'Kirayim. He sat down, between the ovens, which is sort of in the dirtiest part of the house, with the soot all over him. Va'ochel, and he would eat his bread there. V'shoteh, drink his whatever he drank, hopefully water. And aleh shoteh as a kiton shamayim. There we go. He drank a pitcher of water with it. The doma kemisha mito mutal lefanav. It was like he was sitting in front of his relative who had died in front of him. So he really had the custom to take it a whole different level than what we've quoted till now, and really act in that meal, the meal of Sudah HaMafseket, like someone who's literally in mourning, whose dead relative is in front of them. And this, of course, is the custom, which is where, we're not talking about eating meat or not anymore, but we're eating, obviously alone and very simple meals for the Sudah HaMafseket. But the custom, of course, is, just like we do well, the custom, of course, is, and the Rama quotes this, to eat a proper meal before that, so that you have enough energy for the fast, and then eat a Sudah Mafseket after Mincha maybe, which is just the bread, and some people put an egg on it and ashes, all these different customs that have come up. It's not Hata. Now says the Gemara, the Mishnah actually is a Mishnah in Psachim, it's on Hatam, third line from the top, Makom shenagu lasot melacha b'tisha b'av osim. In a city, in a village where their minhag is to permit and to engage in work on Tisha B'Av, then it's okay for someone who lives there to do it. But makom shenagu lo lasot, if it's a custom not to do work, then ein osim, right? Remember, this was in the context of Psachim of following the custom of wherever you are. Mikol makom, says the Mishnah, Talmid Chacham b'telim. Those who are Talmidei Chachamim should not work on Tisha B'Av. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer L'olam yaseh kol adam atzmo k'Talmid Chacham. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, if you recall, earlier has said that you can't make yourself a Talmid Chacham. It looks like you're boasting and all of those concerns. But in this regard, especially because this is Shava al Taseh, right? You're not doing work. You're not doing anything performative. Everyone should take upon themselves as much as they can to be like a Talmid Chacham and to be batel from work on Tisha B'Av, so you can have more effort, energy, and time to focus on the fast day and on the mourning for the destruction of the temple and the other events that happen. Tanya Nami Hachi, in fact, there's a Braita which says this as well. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, L'olam yaseh adam atzmo k'talmid chacham. A person should make himself like a talmid chacham, kedei sheyitaneh, in order so that they can focus more on the fast and be involved and not be distracted by work. Tanya Idach, there's another Braita which says, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, Kol ha'ochel v'shodeh b'tisha b'av, anyone who eats and drinks on Tisha B'Av, which of course is prohibited, but says Reb Shimon Gamliel, Ki'ilo ochel v'shodeh b'yom HaKippur. It's as severe, of course, it's not Yom Kippur's in the Torah, right? It's a Doraita, but he's saying that we treat Tisha B'Av as severely as Yom Kippur. Reb Shimon Gamliel presumably was around, I think it was the generation after the Churban, so this was deeply personal for Reb Shimon Gamliel, right? That maybe he lived during the Churban. It depends on which Reb Shimon Gamliel. But either way, it was obviously a very, very intense thing for him, and he compared it to eating on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Akiva Omer, anyone who works on Tisha B'Av, now remember, the Mishnah said that it depends on the custom of the place. Rabbi Akiva is being machmir, so it seems, and saying that no one should work on Tisha B'Av, not that it's a prohibition like eating or drinking, but that you're not going to get a siman bracha. You will not see any bracha from that. Rashi says from that work, implying the work you do on Tisha B'Av. Tosfos takes this a little bit further and says maybe from that type of work, that if you do it anyways, Tosfos here discusses this a little bit and says that you really should try to minimize to the extent you can. And Chachamim Omrim, continue the Chachamim, Kol ha'osem malacha b'Tisha B'Av, anyone who works on Tisha B'Av and maybe because they're working, they're not focusing. Eino mitabel al Yerushalayim. They don't mourn and they don't focus on the loss and the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Eino ro'eh b'simchata. That person will miss out on the joy of its rebuilding. Shenemar simchu et Yerushalayim v'gilu ba kol ohaveha. Yeshayahu says all the way at the end, rejoice in Yerushalayim, those who love it. Sisu otom masos kol hamit'ablim aleh. All those who mourn for you should now celebrate for you, but implying that it's really mikan amru. This is from what they said. Kol mitabel al Yerushalayim. Anyone who is mitablin aleh, anyone who mourns for the loss of the Beit Hamikdash and the destruction of Yerushalayim will be zochev ro'eh b'simchata, will merit to see it rebuilt and rejoice in it. She'eno mitabel al Yerushalayim, eno ro'eh b'simchata. Tanya nami hachi. In fact, one more braita. Kol ha'ochel basar v'shoteh yain b'tisha b'av. Anyone who drinks a wine and eats meat on Tisha B'Av. Now, it's not clear, you're certainly not allowed to eat on Tisha B'Av, but anyone who rejoices and eats and has fun and ignores the fast, Alava Katuv Omer, Bati Avonotam al Atzmotam. Their sin will last on their bones, or their sin will be strong on them, and they will not rejoice in the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. Should we go further or should we stop here? What's the vote? We should keep going, right?
Yeah.
If
there's I went to a bris once on Tisha B'Av.
Yeah, they
I don't
don't.
remember what they did. I think
The father. So generally, you don't eat. People don't eat, but the father. I think the sandik and the father. I think eat.
Yeah.
I think there's two people. I think it's the son. I think it's the sandik and the father.
A lot of competition to be the Sunday.
I think most people find it pretty uncomfortable, but I've never been asked. But in that day, but I think also the custom. I also remember bris on Tisha B'Av. I think they did in the afternoon, though. Again, that's really debatable, right?
Oh yeah. No, it was an afternoon bris. Yeah.
Right. In the afternoon.
And I think we broke the fast. I think the Su'udah was right after the fast was over.
I think that's the way it's practiced, but but there are people who are supposed to eat on Tisha B'Av for that reason. Okay, we'll do another couple lines because it's an opportunity to learn, even though I'm not leaving much for tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's learn. Well, you can repeat it if you want. Rabbi Yehuda mechayav b'kfiyat hamita. Rabbi Yehuda, and this is back to our Mishnah when we're talking about how you mourn on Tisha B'Av. So in addition to not eating and drinking, of course, and not having wine and meat in the meal before, the Mishnah said Rabbi Yehuda used to require you to turn over your bed. If you recall, we've discussed their beds, I think, a few times, but I think the general structure of the bed, and I might be wrong, because I never really get this, is that they had leather or some kind of skin as a mattress basically, but it was held up by ropes that were underneath it. So basically, they would tie ropes from a frame, and then they would put a piece of skin or something on top of that as their mattress essentially. So not a lot of box springs, but it was held up by these strings underneath. Right. And so in times where they were mourning, they were showing mourning, they would turn over the bed. Of course, if you turn over the bed, it's useless, right? Because the whole point of the bed is that it sits on top of those strings. Once you turn it over, you lay on the strings, and you're not going to, obviously that doesn't do anything. And if you lay on the sheet, you're basically laying on the floor. So by turning over the bed, you essentially made it useless. So that was a practice that mourners used to do. We don't really do it anymore. Tosas here points out that we don't do it mainly or one reason we don't do it is because a lot of concerns about magic, that this was a practice of kshafim, I don't really know what, and then either it looked bad or it was bad. I mean, we'll discuss some of this in Moed Katan, but that we don't really do this anymore, but they used to do it back in those days for an avel, for a mourner. And Tanya, the Chachamim did not agree. Tanya, Amrullah, Rabbi Yehuda, so the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda, why would you turn over your bed on Tisha B'Av? According to your opinion, what about people who can't sleep on the floor? What about nursing women, pregnant women? How could you apply this to people who aren't able to do it? Which seems, I'm not sure what the big question is, but either way, Amar Lahem, so Rabbi Yehuda said back to them, Afani lo amarti ela b'yachol. Of course, all I meant was if you can. I wasn't saying that everyone has to do it. They're not literal mourners, but if you can do it, meaning if you're able to sleep with your bed upside down or sleep on the floor, you should do that. Tanya Mihachi, and the Brighter speaks this out explicitly. Moder Rabbi Yehuda lechachamim b'she'enu yachol. Rabbi Yehuda admits to the chachamim that if you're not able to sleep comfortably or sleep at all with your bed upside down, you shouldn't do it. And modin chachamim Rabbi Yehuda b'yachol. The chachamim admit to Rabbi Yehuda when you can do it, which means that there's no argument, right? If you're strong enough to do it, you do it. If you're not, you're not. So what's my benayo, says the Gemara. So what's the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the chachamim? Ika benayo shar mitot. No, in fact, it has nothing to do with you. And basically, and Tosfos actually uses this language with this support that the basic idea is that you should be mitaneh. If you should do what you can to make yourself less comfortable so that you know it's a fasting. This is his example, which I remember as a kid I loved, is if you usually sleep with 2 pillows, use 1 pillow, right? So that's on the top Tosfos, he uses that example. But you're supposed to, make it that it's different for yourself on Tisha B'Av. But what's the machloka between Yehuda and the Chachamim about turning over the beds? The question is, what symbol are you giving out? And meaning, what about sharmitot? What about all the other beds in the house, right? The way you cover mirrors in the house of an oven, right? Some of that's done for the oven, but a lot of it's done just to show that no one is looking at mirrors, right? And so it's the same idea. Keditanya, as the Braita says, kishamru lechbot hamita, when they say to turn over your bed if someone's an avel, lo mitato bilvad kofet. It's not just your bed that you use. Kol hamitot kulanu kofet. You turn over all of the beds in the house, meaning you're supposed to show that we're not sleeping comfortably in this house because we're mourning. And so if according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's what you would do on Tisha B'Av, you would turn over all the beds. Chachamim say you don't need to do that. But certainly as an individual, you're supposed to do the least you can, maximize your mourning on Tisha B'Av. It finishes the Gemara, Merava, Hilchata Ketanek Didan, Lohodu Chachamim Kol Ikar. The halacha is like our Tana, which is where the Chachamim do not agree to Rabbi Yehuda at all, meaning you shouldn't do this at all. You should not turn over any beds on Tisha B'Av. You're not supposed to engage in that practice of Avelut. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow, God willing, finish Masechet Ta'anit, do Mazal Tov prematurely, and then start, I think, Megillah, and I look forward to picking it up next Motzei Shabbat with you.
You can have the Suda on Tuesday.
It's on the fasting, the seal.
It'd be very appropriate for Tanit.
Sure. Okay, to be discussed. Shavua Tov, everyone.
But